and I've already got my little clicker working. This is rare. Um, uh, Mike James, I'm sorry, I have to give you a hard time. Did you forget something last Thursday night?
Okay, Skip. All right. I'm accountable. I'm not going to forget tomorrow. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've forgotten to record about 50 times on this on our studies, as you well know. Okay, well, last week we began our study or continued our study in Paul's epistles with 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And Paul mentioned the ancient Israelites. And so we began discussing the Israelites and how, they're wandering through the wilderness for 40 years and why they had to wander through the wilderness for 40 years. So today's study is going to take us kind of in that, or tonight's study, kind of in the same direction, but in a lot more depth. God is very patient. I mean, obviously, God is patient. If God wasn't patient, he would have wiped us all out again. The scriptures show how patient God is, but they also show that sometimes his patience runs out. And that's some of what we're going to be talking about today. So let's take a look at some of the scriptures. I told Susan and Teresa a while ago that we're in chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians, and I've only got 2 verses in chapter 10. We're going to be back in Exodus and maybe Leviticus. I can't remember all of them, but anyway. So it all began with what we're going to be talking about tonight began when God freed the Israelites from hundreds of years of slavery and hard labor. One would think that that in itself would bring much joy and happiness to a nation that had been so cruelly treated for so long. But that isn't quite the way it turned out. Now, my old friend Ron Dart used to say this, talking about the law, and I think everybody on here knows that we do our best to observe the law. We don't do it in order to be saved, but we do it because we believe that that's what God wants us to do. But Ron said when somebody was telling him about the Sabbath had been done away and you don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore, Ron said, he said this, he said, okay, let me get this straight. He said the Israelites were coming out of slavery from hundreds of years, and God was showing them about the Sabbath day, and they all went, what? What do you mean we're not going to have to work 7 days a week? We're not taking a day off. What's wrong with you? Anyway, little Ron Dart humor there. Now, before we get into the books of Exodus and Numbers, which we're going to cover a lot from both of them, I want to take a look at a psalm. It's an interesting psalm, and I think it applies here. It sums up what we are going to discuss tonight. So that would be in Psalm 78, beginning in verse 10. And I am going to go through this whole psalm, hard to pronounce that word. And just think about the Israelites. I mean, that's who he's talking about here. He's talking to them too, but he's talking about the Israelites. They did not keep the covenant of God, and they refused to walk in his law. And they forgot his works and his wonders that he had shown them. Marvelous things he did in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea. He caused them to pass through, and he made the waters stand as a heap. In the daytime, he led them with a cloud, and at night, he led them with fire, with a light of fire. I said I had my clicker working. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. And they tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. Yes, they spoke against God. They said, can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, oops, did that switch? Yeah. Behold, he smote the rock that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore, Yahweh heard this and was angry. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, that's Israel, and anger also came up against Israel because they believed not in God and they didn't trust in his salvation. Though he had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven and had rained down manna upon them to eat and had given them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh, he's speaking of the quail. He rained flesh also on them as dust, and feathered fowls like as the sand of the sea. And he let it fall in the midst of their camp, round about their habitations. So they ate and were well filled, for he gave them their own desire. They were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God came on them, and slew the fattest of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel. For all this they still sinned, and did not believe his wondrous works, and believed not for his wondrous works. You know, I mean, that really ought to get our attention. He's talking about the nation that he calls his chosen people. And yet they did everything they could to anger him. Now, the first few weeks after they left Egypt, they managed to get by without a whole lot of grumbling. And this is interesting here because God, and I'm going to show you a map here in just a second, God made a decision not to take the Israelites a certain way. He obviously knew what type people they were and knew what choices they would make. Now, here's a map and the scripture. Exodus 13:17 says, it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God led them. He did not lead them the way of the land of the Philistines. Now, if you notice on this map, up here, right next to the Mediterranean Sea, here's the way of the Philistines, and the promised land is right up here. Straight shot from Goshen to the promised land. But God did not take them that way because he said, these people will repent when they see war and they'll want to return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness, and this is this is one of many tracks that people believe that the Israelites may have taken. And it doesn't matter. I just chose one just because, you know, we have to choose one. We don't know exactly which route they took, but this is just as logical as anywhere else. It says, but God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. So he didn't take them the shortcut because he knew what their character was, and he knew that they were brand new out of slavery. And so he knew what Israel would do, and they would want to go back to Egypt. So this may sound funny, but he made it easy on them and made them walk a lot farther and go through the Red Sea so that they wouldn't be going through the land of the Philistines. And here's another map. It says, Exodus 13:20, took their journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham in the edge of the wilderness. And you can see the orange here is another route. It's pretty much the same route where they came down and they crossed the Red Sea right in here. We don't know exactly where they crossed the Red Sea. We just know that they did. Exodus 13:21. It says, the Lord, or Yahweh, went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud, read that a minute ago, to lead them by the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. They walked continuously. And what was another miracle, and I don't know if they never understood this, but there's a scripture that talks about their sandals did not wear out. And this is during the 40 years. Their sandals didn't wear out. They walked day and night, and they didn't get tired. They were, well, I'm sure they got tired, but they were able to walk day and night. So this gets us back to where Paul was speaking to the Corinthians about God's presence in the pillars of cloud and fire. And you're not going to believe this, but here's a scripture in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1, which we covered last week, but I'm bringing it up again. For brothers, I don't want you to miss the significance of what happened to our fathers. All of them were guided by the pillar of cloud, and they all passed through the sea. You know, they all saw the miracles that God provided, but yet with the majority of them, God was not pleased. So their bodies were strewn across the desert. Now, this is probably speaking of, the 40 years, but they ran into some of God's wrath between Egypt and Mount Sinai, and shortly thereafter also. So now we're going to jump over to Numbers 22, and God looks back and says that the Israelites tested him 10 times. And this is where our study starts, and we're going to go through those 10 times that the Israelites tested God. And he got to the point where he was pretty fed up with them. And they're very lucky, and we're very lucky, they didn't just wipe them out. Numbers 14:22. Because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles, think about that. They saw all the miracles while they were in Egypt. They saw the miracle of the Red Sea parting that they walked through. They saw the miracle of the manna coming down from heaven to give them something to eat. They saw the miracle of water coming out of rocks. They saw the miracle of quail. And they saw all of these, and it says, and they have tempted, even though they saw those, they have tempted me now these 10 times. Now, I looked at several sources to see if everybody was in agreement with the 10 specific times that Israel tempted God, and I did not find 100% agreement. So what I have done is I have taken the consensus of 10 times that Israel tempted God in the wilderness. Now, I've tried to keep these in chronological order, but, I might have slipped up a time or two. And you're going to see that we're going to jump back and forth between Exodus and Numbers. Now, the first of these tests was pretty obvious. It's when they were at the edge of the Red Sea. And here's where they were at the edge of the Red Sea, Exodus 14:9. The Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them encamping by the sea beside and before Baal Zephon. I don't do my pronunciations very, very well. So, like I said, this is one of the many assumed sites of the Red Sea crossing. And so in verse 10 of Exodus 14, It says, when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and they saw the Egyptians that were coming after them, and they were scared to death. Well, that's understandable. Even though God had performed all of these miracles. And they cried out to the Lord, to Yahweh. And they said to Moses, see, this is where they got in trouble. Hey, Moses, were there no graves in Egypt? Have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us this way to make us leave Egypt? You know, yeah, we were slaves and it was not fun and they worked us, but they fed us. They gave us a place to sleep. Verse 12, isn't this the word that we told you in Egypt? And we said, leave us alone. This is after the straw episode where Pharaoh took the straw away from him and said, well, hey, you're going to have to make the brick whether you like it or not. And you're going to have to make it without straw. They said, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. Didn't we tell you that? We would have been a lot better off dying in Egypt rather than dying in the wilderness. That one kind of puzzles me a little bit. Now, I'll have to say I can kind of understand the fear of the Israelites. I mean, this was pretty new to them. I mean, the plagues have been going on for, it's my understanding, about a year or so. But, you know, one would think that eventually, after seeing all the miracles, that they would have had the faith in God that he was looking for, that he wanted to see in them. But nope, we just don't see much faith in them. I'm not asking you to answer this question, but would you have had that kind of faith? You know, I don't know whether I would have or not. Exodus 14, verse 13. So Moses said to the people, hey, look, don't be afraid. Stand there and watch and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will show you today. You're going to see it today. He is going to reach down and save you from the from the Egyptians. For the Egyptians whom you've seen today, you're not going to see them anymore. God's going to take care of them. They are going to be no more problem. God is going to fight for you, and it ought to shut you up. You know, he says, you shall hold your peace. Now, Moses had faith that God would rescue him, but God seemed to be more than a little bit irritated with Moses over some other stuff. Exodus 14:15. Then the Lord said to Moses, well, why are you crying out to me? Tell Israel to go forward. I've parted the Red Sea. Tell them to hit the road. Verse 22, and the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground. That's another miracle, one that you don't really think about. How muddy do you think this would have been after thousands and thousands and thousands and maybe millions of years of the sea on top of this ground? But it says they walked on dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. You know, I do think that they did a good job in the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston when they showed the waters on each side of the Israelites. I think they did a good job there. Verse 23, and the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in verse 26, it says, and the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea. This is when Moses and the Israelites were all on the other side. Stretch out your hand over the sea that the waters may come on the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen. And so Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength. It went back to normal. And it covered the whole Egyptian army. says when morning appeared, and so I can't help but think this is happening at night. It says, and the Egyptians fled against it. They tried to get out, but they couldn't, and they were drowned. And Yahweh overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And then 1431 says, and Israel saw that great work which the Lord did to the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord. Now, hopefully that means they had a healthy respect, but it says that they feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So it sounds like at least at this particular point, I'm sorry, I've got acid reflux, and I'm hiccuping and coughing and everything else. So hopefully all y'all are okay with it. But it says they feared the Lord. They had a healthy respect, and they believed him, and they believed Moses. But that party didn't last long. That attitude didn't last long. So they continued their travels toward the promised land. But guess what? Next came complaining about bitter water. Now, it's understandable that they wanted sweet water, but you would think by now they would know to ask nicely. But they didn't. It says, so Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness. They didn't find any water. And when they came to Marah, that Marah means bitter, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, hey, what are we going to drink? They had seen all these miracles, and they reach a point, they're thirsty, and they say, hey, Moses, you need to fix this. So Exodus 15:25, Moses cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. He made a statute and an ordinance. In other words, a law. Now, it doesn't tell us exactly what the law was at this particular point, but he did make it. Verse 26. And Moses told the Israelites, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, and you will do what is right in his sight. Now, question, how would they know to do right in God's sight if they didn't know a little bit about his law? How would they know what right was? And the biblical definition for sin is transgression of the law. And when Cain killed Abel, God said to Cain, if you don't do right, I'm paraphrasing, then sin lies at your door. What is sin? Violation of God's law. Okay, anyway, I'm not going to get into all of that totally because I have 2,500 other words to talk about. He said, if you will do what is right in his sight and will give ear to what? His commandments. It's kind of interesting. They're not to Mount Sinai yet, are they? Huh. And you will give ear to his commandments, and you will keep his statutes. Then I will put none of these diseases on you, which I brought upon the Egyptians. For I am the Lord that heals you. The point I'm making, which is pretty clear, is that there was a law. There were commandments. There were statutes. And they were, when they got to Mount Sinai, God reiterated his law. It wasn't brand new. It was already in effect. But anyway, we'll go on. Verse 27, they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the waters. The next gripe session results in God blessing them with manna from heaven. So they murmured against God. They griped and moaned and groaned and complained. But God blessed them. And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Mount Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. Now, another thing that's kind of interesting here, if God had not already set up his calendar, which was based on months, based on the moon, how would they have known it was the 15th day of the second month? And back in Exodus 12, when God said, this is the first day of the year for you, he wouldn't have said that if there hadn't been a calendar in effect. My point is just real simple. God's law, his calendar, his statutes, his commandments had been in effect, maybe since all the way back to Adam and Eve. Anyway, that's my opinion. You don't have to agree.
It's good.
Yeah, break.
I'm putting together a Bible study for the Sabbath, and the topic is the law before Sinai. So it's pretty funny. You're hitting on all the right spots. But one of the really fun things that I found today was this mention that when the angels visit Sodom and Lot's there, and he prepares a feast for them whenever they decide to come back to his house.
Yeah.
It says that he prepares for them unleavened bread.
Yeah.
Which is highly irregular, right? I mean, that'd be kind of bizarre, unless it was during the days of unleavened bread, which then it makes total sense. So I agree with you. I think that they definitely had God's holy days were there. You know, they knew they had his calendar there, so they knew when to keep them. So I think that's absolutely true. There's about 33 other examples. I'm going to spare you. I'm going to save it for the Bible study, but it's all throughout Genesis, indications of his law.
Right. Thanks. That is exactly right. Let's see, I was going to say something. Oh, well, didn't matter. Anyway, okay. So, verse 1 of Exodus 16 talks about the 15th day of the second month. They left Egypt on the 15th day of the first month, which was the beginning of the days of unleavened bread, by the way, which he tells them that. He said, you know, you shall eat 7 unleavened bread for 7 days, and leavening shall not be found in your houses. Okay, verse 2. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel. Now, we're talking about a couple of million people, if I understand it right. And they murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. They just can't be made to be happy or satisfied. God's given them water. God's given them food. He has rescued them from slavery. But they got to murmur again. And listen, here again, I'm not going to say Skip wouldn't have been right in the middle of it. I might have been their spokesman. Who knows? I'm not going there. Verse 3, the children of Israel said to Moses and Aaron, man, I wish God had just let us die by the hand of well, let me read it exactly. Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, where we sat by the flesh pots. We had food. And when we did eat bread to the full, we might have been worked half to death, but we had plenty of food. Now, you look what you've done. You've brought us forth into this wilderness to kill us, to starve us to death. And then Yahweh, the Lord, said to Moses, okay, behold, all right, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to rain bread down from heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day. Now, here is before they got to Mount Sinai. And God is about to introduce to them this day that we call the Sabbath. It's a day of rest. That's the main purpose of the Sabbath day, and that is that man needs a day off. And God gave man a day off. Now, we at the same time, we who observe the Sabbath, we also worship God on that day. That's our day of the day that we have church services. But the main purpose of the Sabbath day, well, I hate to say main, there's a lot of purposes, but it's a day of rest. And he said, I'm going to prove them whether they will walk in, what are those two words there? My law. This is before they got to Mount Sinai again. I'm going to prove them whether they walk in my law or not. So here's what happened. God said, look, I'm going to rain manna down from heaven for 5 days. And don't collect any more than what you and your family can eat. Don't do it. All you need is to collect enough manna to feed your family for 1 day. Now, if you gather more than that, it's going to pretty much stink up your tent. It's going to be pretty bad. But then he goes on and he says, but now on the 6th day, I want you to bring in twice as much, and it's not going to rot. It's not going to stink. It'll hold over until the Sabbath day, because this is the 6th day is the day of preparation. And so I'm going to give you twice as much, and it's not going to stink. But on the other 5 days, people went out and gathered too much. Guess what? Stunk up the house. Really, really bad. Had worms crawling all over the place. But on the 6th day, it lasted for 48 hours. So now that I've said that, here's what the scriptures, they say the same thing. It shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it will be twice as much as they gather daily. And Moses said, okay, here's the deal. When the Lord shall give you in the evening quail, and in the morning manna for the full, for that the Lord hears your murmurings, which you murmur against us. You know, God's not mad at him yet. He's working toward that, but he's not really angry with them yet. And Moses said, look, your complaining is not against Aaron and I, but it's against God. And Moses spoke to Aaron and said, Aaron, here's what I want you to do. Go tell the children of Israel to come to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining. And it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the Shekinah glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. You talk about bright. It was blindingly bright. Verse 12. I've heard all the complaints of the children of Israel. Look, I want you to talk to them and tell them, look, in the evening I'm going to send quail, and in the morning I'm going to send manna, and you will know that I am the Lord your God. Now this is one of the purposes of prophecy. I'm not saying this is a prophecy, but in Ezekiel in particular, if you read the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel says, such and such is going to happen. And when it does, they shall know that I am the Lord your God. And that comment is made many, 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 many times. And that may be one of the purposes of prophecy. Everybody likes to do a prophecy about, well, here's what's going to happen. I'm telling you, this is what's going to happen. It's going to happen on April the 10th, 2021. And this is exactly what's going to happen. That's not the purpose for prophecy. Yeah, in some cases, yes, but most of the time it's so that you will know that God has done what he said he was going to do. And he says that many times in the book of Ezekiel. Verse 13, and it came to pass. Wow. God says, I'm going to do this. And in verse 13, it says it happened. At evening, the quails came, and they covered the camp. And in the morning, the dew lay round about the host. The host is what we call manna. And the Hebrew for manna is what? Huh? What is it? What's it? That's what the Hebrew of the word manna is, because they had no idea. What is that? We're supposed to eat that? And when the dew that lay was gone, and you all know what the dew looks like. It's on the grass or on the ground. And when the day heats up a little bit, the dew will disappear. And it says, when the dew was gone, behold, on the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which God has given you to eat. Verse 16. And I've lost my place. Okay, let me just read that and I'll find my place in my notes in a minute. This is the stuff that God told you to gather every man according to his eating. Don't gather more than you and your wife and your kids can eat. An omer for every person. That's an omer is what, 2.5 quarts or something like that. According to the number of your persons, according to your family size, take every man for them which are in his tents. And so the children of Israel did, and they gathered, some more, some less, based on their family size. And when they did mete it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing left over. And he that gathered little had no lack, for they gathered every man according to his eating. And here's where God told Moses to say this. Let no man leave of it till the morning. Don't try to collect twice as much as you need. Don't try to get breakfast. This is for today. And of course, they didn't listen to him. They hearkened not. But some of them left it until the morning, and it bred worms, and it stunk. And Moses was angry with them. And he said to them, this is what Yahweh has said. Look, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe what you will seethe, and that which remains over will be okay in the morning. And they laid it up till the morning as Moses told them, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. God was teaching them that he has set aside a day that he didn't want us working. And so he gave them twice as much food on Friday so that they would have food to eat on Saturday or the Sabbath. And Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. It's not a Sabbath to Israel. It's not a Sabbath to the Jews. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. Today, you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, in it there will be none. And it came to pass, guess what? That some ignored the command. And they went out on the 7th day for to gather, and they didn't find anything. And if they had not gathered twice as much the day before, guess what? They went hungry. And Yahweh said to Moses, how long are your people, how long refuse you to keep? And here's these words again before they got to Mount Sinai. How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Wherefore he gave you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide you every man in his place. Nobody needs to go out on the Sabbath day looking for food, because there ain't going to be any. You need to stay in and rest. So the people, the majority of them, verse 30, rested on the Sabbath day. And Moses said this is the thing which the Lord commands. Fill an omer of it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread wherewith I have fed you in the wilderness when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. Now, they don't know why they're doing this at this point. They have no idea why God wants them to, verse 33, Aaron, take a pot, put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. Now, what are they going to do with this pot of manna? Y'all can jump in. I know you know this.
Put it in the ark.
Put it in the ark. They didn't have an ark yet, though, did they?
No, they didn't.
So God was telling them ahead of time. He didn't tell them why. If I'd have been there, I would have asked why, and I would have been in trouble. But he didn't tell them why. He said, I want you to fill a pot, and I want you to keep it for your generations. They knew nothing about an ark at this point. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. Exodus 17:1. Now I need to find myself. Oh, there I am. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no more water, wasn't any water. And so the people griped and moaned and groaned and complained and screamed and yelled at Moses and said, Moses, give us water. Didn't say, hey, Moses, tell the Lord to give us water. They said, Moses, give us water. And Moses says, why are you griping at me? You're just tempting God. And guess what? You're going to be in trouble. And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses. And they said, why is this that you've brought us out? Here we go again. Why in the world did you bring us out of Egypt? We were doing just fine. In verse 4, Moses cried to the Lord, saying, What am I going to do with these people? They're about ready to stone me. And Yahweh said to Moses, look, go before the people and take the elders with you, and your rod wherewith you smote the river, when it turned to blood, take it in your hand and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted Yahweh, saying, is Yahweh among us or not? After all they'd been through, after all the miracles that they had seen, they're still doubting God. Is he really among us? I haven't seen any signs that God is with us. Oh, really? about 20 of them up to this point. So next, they're really going to get in trouble with God. I mean, God is really getting fed up with them at this point. Exodus 19:1 says, in the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. Now, this is pure speculation. It's speculation of the Jews. They may be right. They may not. But they contend that they came to Mount Sinai on the day of Pentecost. Now, the Old Testament, it's called the Feast of Weeks. And I don't have time to get into all of that, but the Israelites were told to, from the morrow after the Sunday morning, we found out later, during the days of unleavened bread, they were to count 7 Sabbaths, and on the morrow after the 7th Sabbath would be the Feast of Weeks, or we call it Pentecost also, the 50th day. So that's what the Jews think, and I don't have a problem with that at all. I know we're close to 50 days since Israel left Egypt. And that's what the Jews believe. God gave Moses the law on the Feast of Weeks. They believe that when he went up on the mountain, it was Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks. The timing works, but it may not have been. That's one of those things, those 3 little words that are so important. We don't know. We'll find that out one of these days. Verse 2, for they were departed from Rephidim, and they came to the desert of Sinai, and they put up their tents in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mountain, before Mount Sinai. So Moses went up the mountain, and Yahweh called to him out of the mountain and said, all right, Moses, here's what you're going to say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel. Now, I think most of you probably know this, but Jacob was Isaac's son, and his name was changed to Israel. So house of Jacob and children of Israel is redundant, same people. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. Did they not? Had they not seen what he did to the Egyptians? Killed the firstborn, turned their water to blood, sent frogs out of the water, locusts, and destroyed the Egyptian army. So yeah, you've seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And I've always chuckled about that. They might have argued about this eagle's wings stuff, but he did take them directly where he wanted them to go. Verse 5. Now, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant. What covenant? Is he talking about the covenant with Abraham? Or is he talking about a covenant with the Israelites that he hadn't given them yet? If you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure. You'll be special to me above all people. For everything on the earth is mine, and you're going to be my special people. And you shall be unto me words. I didn't put a space there. Sorry about that. And you shall be unto me words which a kingdom. That's not right. Anyway, you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests. You shall be a holy nation. These are, boy, I tell you what, this translation was really messed up. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. I think the right there, that word right there goes right here. Anyway, what does a priest do? And I don't care what religion you're talking about. I don't care if you're talking about pagan religions or if you're talking about a priest in a Christian church today. You know, the Catholic call their priests, they're the leaders. They are the teachers. They're the ones that understand the dogma or the doctrine or the doctrines of that church. He told Israel, I want you to teach the world of my ways. You shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. This is what God wanted Israel to do. They blew it. Now it's going to be a while before they totally blow it, but they're on their way to getting in a whole lot of trouble. And he says, these are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. And Moses came and he called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which Yahweh had commanded him. He's been up to, and I didn't put every scripture in here. He's been to the burning bush. He's talked to God. In verse 8, all the people answered together and said, sure, no problem. We're going to do everything that he tells us to do. And Moses went back to God and said, guess what? They said they would be more than happy to believe you and to worship you and to love you and to obey you. But did they? Exodus 19:10. And Yahweh said to Moses, okay, we're going to have a special day coming up. I want you to go and sanctify or set them apart, set them for a special holy purpose. Sanctify them today and tomorrow. Let them clean up. Want them to wash their clothes and be ready against the third day. For the third day, Yahweh will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And it came to pass on the third day, just like God had said, they were there, they were ready, they'd washed their clothes, they'd gotten ready for 2 days, so here they are, it's the third day. I'm losing myself. It came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mount and the voice of a trumpet, a blast, exceeding loud, so that all the people that were in the camp trembled, scared them to death. And God spoke his 10 commandments to the people. God spoke all these words, saying, then he went through the 10 commandments. I am the Lord your God, which had brought you, and so on. But they were afraid of God's voice. And they said to Moses, you speak with us. We will listen. But please, we can't take God speaking to us. We're scared to death that we're going to die. He is so powerful. His voice is so powerful. So this is really kind of funny. The first commandment, it says, and the Lord, I'm not talking about the 10 commandments. This is a commandment that he gave directly to them. And Yahweh said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, you've seen that I've talked with you from heaven. You shall not make with me gods of silver, neither shall you make unto you gods of gold. That just kills me. What was the first thing they did? They made a golden calf and they started worshiping. The first thing God said, I'm your God. You're not going to make idols. And you're certainly not going to make gods of gold and worship them. Were they just not listening? And God continued speaking to Moses instead of the Israelites. He's moved to talking to Moses. Moses has gone up on the mountain again. We did a Bible study a few months ago, I guess now, where talking about the different times that Moses went up and down the mountain. You won't believe how many times he went up and down the mountains, but I'm not going to get into it right now. He said, now, these are the judgments which you shall set before them. And the Lord said to Moses, come up to be into the mount and be there. And I will give you tablets of stone and a law and commandments which I have written, that you may teach them. Now, these commandments were already in effect. He'd already been showing them the commandments long before they ever got there. So we have somehow managed to go through 2,540 words in exactly an hour in about 10 seconds. And I can't believe it. Now we're going to get into chapters 21, 22, and 23. Those are judgments. I say we're going to get into them. I can't remember if we're going to get into them or not. But those chapters are the judgments that God gave to Moses to tell the Israelites. And it was before he went up the mountain. It wasn't until chapter 24 that Moses did go up the mountain. So we're going to stop there tonight, and we're going to continue with Moses and the Israelites next week. And I know that some of you out there are thinking, Skip, I thought this was a study of 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So let me just leave you with this. If you want to complain that we're spending too much time in the Old Testament, take it up with Paul. He's the one that brought it up. Comments, questions, corrections? That was fun for me. I don't know about for you all.
Well, it was definitely fun for me because what I told you, I'm preparing. One thing that comes to mind immediately is, well, what's the big deal? What does it matter if the law was around before Moses, quote unquote, brought it down from Mount Sinai? I think it's important for a couple of reasons, but for me, one of the most important reasons is that it's like it characterizes the law as something that is, was, is, and will forever be, and that it's indispensable. Because there's a lot of people out there, a lot of Christians who believe that the law is able to be easily dispensed, and albeit it's being dispensed, they believe it's dispensed from Christ, who is the interpreter of the law. So that is absolutely possible, but I think we have a different understanding of Matthew 5:17, or a different belief. In other words, that he didn't do away with the law. But it's important. I think it gives, if you understand that the law had always been there, and what Moses came down Mount Sinai with was the Decalogue and kind of a revelation of the law and a covenant, then that says to me, well, hold on, maybe the law is these 613 laws are really all still in effect. Some aren't applicable because there's no temple and priestly order. But anyways, yeah, man, great study. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thanks.
Good. Anybody else? Well, all right. Next week, tonight was 3,592 words. Next week is 4,400. So, and we're going to continue going in the same direction. We're not through with the 10 times that Israel tempted God. Yeah, somebody's going to say something. I thought I heard a sound.
I'm noticing a trend here, Skip. You're going to continue to make these longer and longer?
It's possible. It's possible. We had 7 weeks that we spent on one chapter in Hebrews.
Yeah, that's right.
I like to get into the detail. John Reedy and I've talked about this a lot. He said, particularly on Saturday morning, he said the difference between what we do in our Bible studies And what the teachers at Ambassador College or any college was that he said, Skip, you have no time limit.
Well, at least it was well done, and yeah, you might get a different moniker, right? Gerald Waterhouse, is that what's
Yeah, hey, Michael Deering is our Gerald Waterhouse.
Okay.
No. I get help. That's not all by myself.
That's true. Yeah, our Saturday morning group is very active, very active. Yeah, how about that, Mike? I told Mike I was really proud of him because he was able to corral his group on Thursday nights to 1 hour. I did it tonight, didn't I?
You did?
You know, in terms of the law existing, before the Ten Commandments were given to Moses, if you look at Malachi 3:6, I'm the Lord, I change not. Well, if he doesn't change, the laws had to be the same before Moses and after Moses.
Yeah, and one of the things that Jesus Christ came to do was to explain to the world, to Israel, to the Jews at that particular time, that there is a principle in every law. It's not just the letter. And he made it very clear with the examples that he used. One was murder. And he said, the law says don't murder, but I'm telling you, don't hate your brother. And he said adultery. And the law says not to commit adultery, but I'm telling you, don't lust after women in your head. And so that's the principle behind the law. Another one, which Paul uses twice, is don't muzzle the ox that treads the corn. Well, that doesn't make any sense. None of us have ox, but guess what? If you have someone who's working for you, you're not to mistreat them. Paul was specifically talking about that it was okay for ministers to be paid if they were full-time in the ministry. Anyway, anybody else? Well, all right. Well, I enjoyed it. And next week there's no telling where we'll start, but we will start next week. So,
Good night, Skip.
Good night. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Skip.
Thanks,
Thank
Skip.
you. Thank
Enjoy.
you.
You all.